Welcome to session 29 of the Simple course. This is the last simple session in which we're presenting formal material. Next week's session, our last, will be an open conversation about the last 8 months and about the future. After all the hard work you've done, today I'm asking you to indulge me. Today's session is wildly speculative and very personal. In it, I share with you my favorite story of what in heaven this, meaning the universe we live in, life, and consciousness all is. Fundamentally, I'm an agnostic who longs for God. An agnostic is a person who believes that nothing is known or can be known about the existence or nature of God or of anything beyond material phenomenon. A person who claims neither faith nor disbelief in God. I do, however, believe in the power of our stories in shaping our lives. I just keep hoping to have a mystical experience that so many others have had that convinces them that this ineffable or impossible to describe other world that is hidden beyond the veil and that I long for is more real than the material world we live in. Let me start with a quotation by theologian David Bentley Hart. Wisdom is a return to innocence at the far end of experience. It is the ability to see again what most of us have forgotten how to see, but now fortified by the ability to translate some of that vision into words, however inadequate. To watch our introductory videos entitled Bernardo Kastrup's Analytical Idealism and The Goal of Meditation and Philosophy, please go to session 29 on the website itsimple2021.com. Next are our usual reminders directed mostly at people doing the course in a group setting. Please take a few moments to read these on your own. To watch this week's mindfulness practice video entitled A 5-Minute Meditation, please go to the website now. For people doing the YouTube course as part of a group, you can now pause for questions, comments, or feedback. This is what we plan to do today. We'll ask you to fill out the course evaluation form and assessment questionnaires. The topic today is What in Heaven is All This? An integral the story. At the midway point, we will take a break. We will also have time for discussion. Please rate your homework now. Completing these tools and questionnaires at the beginning and at the end of the simple course gives us useful information as to whether or not this course helps. Please take the time to fill these out. Take a picture of the completed questionnaire with your name on it and the date and email it back to us at itsimple2023@gmail.com. Please fill out 1, the simple course patient survey, as well as 2, the PHQ-9, and 3, the HAM-D. Your suggestions and feedback are critical so that we can continue to adapt the course to your needs. It also helps us to determine if the course is helpful. Next week, in the last simple session, you'll have the opportunity to give us your suggestions and feedback in person. The survey can be found at this link, as well as on the website. The PHQ-9 and HAM-D are on the website. Thank you. Sessions 26 and 29 are complementary. In session 26, we saw how spirituality and religion are premised on the belief that the realms of the soul and spirit are as real or more real than the material realm. We also explored mysticism, spirituality, and religion, and their impact on our well-being. Today, we'll argue that the modern materialistic scientific worldview is an outdated map of the universe, and that philosophical idealism which affirms soul and spirit is a better one. Over the last 8 months, we've spent more than 100 hours together. We have zoomed in to look closely at a number of psychological theories, many DBT skills, 6 tools, and several strategies, which we hope have helped us all learn about ourselves and how to better cope, heal, and grow. Today, in our last structured simple session, we zoom out and come full circle to, just as we did in session 4, look at the human experience from a philosophical perspective. Only now, that perspective is informed by all that we've learned in this course. Today, we will not focus on individual issues, but rather on how what we have learned about ourselves also applies at the planetary and universal scales. The topics that we will cover today include the cosmic egg, personal, interpersonal, and transpersonal wise mind. What is this that we call the universe? Integral theory stages and quadrants, the growth of the universe, human and social growth, arcane crisis, the stories of and problems with the integral stages of growth, an integral perspective on our current crisis, repairing the crisis, finding a meaningful worldview and a meaningful metaphysics, glimpses of what this is, Bernardo Kastrup's integral theory of everything, idealism and the multiplicity of self, how integral worldviews are transforming the world, and integral medicine. You said that we're starting with the concept of the cosmic egg. Can you explain what that is? The cosmic egg is a mythological motif found in the origin stories of many cultures. It holds that all that is was hatched from this egg. From the egg arise 3 levels of story, from smaller and more limited to larger and limitless. Father Richard Rohr writes, a healthy psyche lives within at least 3 levels of meaning, that is, within 3 sets of stories, my, ours, and the story. My story is embedded in our story, which in turn is embedded in the story. My story is my individual story that tells me who I am and what the world is. Such personal stories guide each of us in everyday life and are part of our personality. Our stories are the collective cultural stories that we share as a society. Integral theory proposes that in Western societies, there are several distinct subcultures, each of which has different stories. Today, the dominant subcultures are the traditional, modern, and postmodern. Western society has multiple coexisting worldviews. The story is the ultimate truth, or what this we call life and the universe fundamentally is. Many, including me, believe that the story is unknowable as it is beyond the human cognitive spectrum. We may, however, occasionally get glimpses of that the story in mystical experiences. Our well-being hinges on whether my personal, our cultural, and the universal stories give us meaning and purpose. Many people living in Western societies do not have my, ours, and their stories that are meaningful and give them purpose. This contributes to them falling into personal, cultural, and global holes in the sidewalk. We have stories for ourselves, our groups, and for the whole universe. For each of these 3 levels of stories, my story, our story, and this story, people can have either emotional mind stories or wise mind stories. There are therefore 3 levels of wise mind: personal, interpersonal, and transpersonal. A few weeks ago, when we discussed internal family systems and wise mind remediation, we explored personal wise mind remediation, which is used in internal family parts work. A person's growth and healing involves their personal wise mind taking over leadership from their parts. Last week, we considered how relationship repair, healing, and growth involves interpersonal wise mind taking over leadership from the parts of the people in that relationship. Interpersonal wise mind, in contrast with personal wise mind, which is mindful of only one person's parts, seeks to see and understand the internal family parts of everyone involved in their relationship and how they interact. Today, we further zoom out from personal and interpersonal wise mind and consider transpersonal wise mind, which is involved in the repair, healing, and growth not of the individual or group, but of the whole planet's fragmented parts. Are the my, ours, and the stories of the cosmic egg related to integral theory? Integral theory is Kent Wilber's attempt to place a wide variety of theories and thinkers into one single framework. According to integral theory, all of human experience fits into four quadrants: I, it, we, and its. I is consciousness or mind. It is all that is material. We is anything that happens between beings that are conscious. Its is when material things come together in more complex ways, such as systems. My, ours, and their stories describe what lies in each of these quadrants. Homo sapiens has been around for 200,000 years. Over that time, nature, or the it, which physics, chemistry, geology, biology study, hasn't changed significantly. Thanks to the discoveries and evolution of those fields, our knowledge, technology, and cultural stories, the I, we, and its have, however, changed immensely. The evolution of these stories is described by the integral stages of growth, also known as altitudes of development. Does the integral stage of growth have a cosmic egg, my, ours, and the story? Yes, the integral stage of growth has several my, ours, and the stories. In some ways, these stories are like quantum theory's probability waves that haven't yet collapsed into one story. In the simple course, we have already covered some integral my and our stories. Today, we're going to put some of the stories out there. Evolution 1.0, the universe. A quotation from Brian Swim. If you let hydrogen gas alone for 13 billion years, it will become giraffes, rose bushes, and humans. The universe has evolved from the simplicity of hydrogen and helium, which is all that seemed to have existed up until 370,000 years after the Big Bang, to pockets of great complexity, such as the Earth, where structures such as the human brain and global ecosystems exist. The Big Bang seems to have been a simple seed of potentiality from which a complex universe is unfolding. Physics, chemistry, geology, biology, and human history all describe the stages of growth of this potentiality. Why this evolution is happening is a mystery of the magnitude of why is there something rather than nothing, and what is consciousness. Materialist science holds the view that this evolution from simplicity to complexity is due to randomly arising physical laws. Traditional religious views evoke a designing intelligence, God, as the architect of this complexity. What appears indisputable is that this universe, arising in the Big Bang, is set up to evolve towards complexity and exquisitely fine-tuned for life to emerge. If the universe was random, the chances that it would turn out this way are infinitesimal. Aware of this, materialist cosmologists come up with improbable explanations to salvage their story, such as that our universe is but one of an infinite number of universes, most of which have different laws and are inhospitable to complexity and life. If there are an infinity of universes, in the same way that an infinity of monkeys will eventually type out all of Shakespeare's works by random chance, a universe will arise where all the conditions are such that the complexity that we see in our universe will arise. Evolution 2.0 and 3.0. Biological and social evolution. There are parallels between the evolution of life and that of human societies. As organisms become more complex, evolving from unicellular to complex beings such as animals, we see the development of systems that help integrate the function of the different specialized cells. The endocrine, central, and autonomic nervous systems are examples of integrating systems. Culture and its institutions are the integrating systems of societies. In this course, we explored a biopsychosocial-spiritual model as we have tried to understand ourselves better and come up with meaningful my stories. We have also considered how our stories, that is, our common ideas, culture, social structures, organization, and institutions, evolved from simpler to more complex societies. Simpler social forms of organization include bands and tribes. The most complex social forms of organization that exist today are large nations with hundreds of millions of citizens and multinational organizations such as the European Union and the United Nations. Our stories, guiding how people interact with one another and the world, and social institutions that work well for simpler societies, such as bands and tribes that are at an earlier stage of development, don't work so well when societies become larger and more complex. To remain adaptive, worldviews and institutions, that is, cultures, go through the stages of growth described by integral theory, from archaic to tribal, warrior, traditional, modern, postmodern, and integral. Our stories and their supporting institutions that are not adaptive to the current global circumstances, as they were in the past circumstances, are dysregulated, just like emotions that are about the past can be dysregulated. Are you saying that the multiple crises that we're facing in the world today has something to do with dysregulated our and the stories? Our current crisis. Traditional, modern, and postmodern worldviews are not well adapted to present day global society. They are dysregulated because while they were once adaptive, today they're unable to deal with the global holes or crisis we find ourselves in. The crises we are currently globally experiencing are partly a result of there being different subcultures within our culture. That, like IFS part selves, each have different worldviews and are becoming increasingly polarized and unable to work together to find common ground in their assessments of the problems we are facing and on the approaches needed to begin dealing with them. Rather than use our energy and ingenuity to begin working on our very serious common global holes, we are using them to fight one another, believing that only those who think like us and are at our stage of development have the right answers. As the American storyteller Michael Meade writes, we are worn down, worn out, and exhausted. COVID crisis, political crisis, climate crisis, we are divided and socially distant. It's hard to find wisdom in a divided world. And as John Vervaeke, a U of T professor, comments, the meaning crisis is at the root of the modern crisis in mental health, the response to environmental collapse, and the political system. We are drowning in bullshit, literally meaninglessness. We feel disconnected from others, each other, and a viable future. These problems are deeper than just social media problems, political problems, even economic problems. They are deeply historical, cultural, cognitive problems. In the face of these crises, we follow selfish leaders and fight one another over relatively trivial things, rather than agreeing on what the big problems are and working together to start addressing them. As a society, we keep falling into the same holes, destroying Mother Earth, other species, and ourselves in the process. These should be our targets for a planetary holes diary card. How did we get here? A quotation from Carl Jung. Restlessness begets meaninglessness, and the lack of meaning in life is a soul sickness whose full extent and full import our age has not yet begun to comprehend. We saw that what makes us so successful as a species is the culture we share. This includes our knowledge, values, institutions, spirituality, etc. Our shared beliefs, values, and goals serve to unite us and allow us to cooperate and prosper together. Good cultural maps, our stories, help us navigate the world and give us meaning and purpose. Currently, we live in a meaning crisis. Our stories are falling apart. Traditionalism conflicts with science. Modernity lacks meaning. And postmodernity holds that no culture story is better than any other, except their own story. The subcultures that exist within our society are engaged in cultural wars. These wars give us more that divides us than unites us. Our cultural maps have gotten us lost. Some say go in one direction, others say go in the opposite one. Faced with the wars between the various subcultures, people in Western societies have forgotten what connects them, stopped listening to each other, and doubled down dogmatically on their own limited stories, temporarily forgetting how lost they are. We fill the void created by not having good stories by identifying with and thus belonging in partisan ways to tribal, warrior, traditional, modern, and postmodern stories that only give us partial maps of the world and promote a limited type of connection at the expense of scapegoats and outgroups. We follow leaders who sound confident they have all the answers and know which direction to go in. Or we lose faith in those leaders and want to blow the whole system up. We are collectively in fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. We need to get back to rational and wise mind and need a new story and map adapted to our current reality. Can you explain what it is about the various stages of growth that has led to the current crisis? I can try to summarize some of the problems with the traditional, modern, and postmodern stages of growth. Problems with the various integral stages of growth. Traditional is the oldest stage of growth. Next comes the modern, postmodern, and integral. The traditional, modern, and postmodern, like internal family systems parts, have part of reality. The traditional stage of growth has faith in spirit and soul. The problem is that it takes literally what is metaphorical and conflicts with science. The modern says that spirit and soul are not real, and it believes in reason. The problem is that materialist metaphysics is wrong. Postmodern believes that spirit and soul are not real, and that reason is subjective and relative. The problem is that it holds all viewpoints are relative except its own. The integral stage of growth, in contrast to the traditional modern and postmodern stages, can be seen not as a part, but as wise mind. It includes spirit, soul, and reason. The problem with it will be determined by the next stage that has yet to emerge. Let's briefly focus in on the modern and postmodern stages and some of the scientific and cultural problems with their stories. Problems with the modern and postmodern stories are scientific and cultural. In terms of scientific problems, they are in conflict with quantum physics. They have philosophical inconsistencies. They do not answer why there is something rather than nothing. They do not explain the finely tuned universe. They make the implausible claim that evolution of the universe is random. They face the hard problem of consciousness. They can't explain psychosomatic illnesses or the placebo effect, synchronicities, and the supernatural. Cultural stories include the unsustainability of treating the planet as a machine and a resource, the unsustainability of turbo capitalism, the lack of a meaningful cultural worldview, the growing loss of connections to ourselves, others, a meaningful occupation, nature, and a meaningful story about the universe. How the traditional priorities of the second half of life are ignored. Are there integral stage stories that offer us a way out of this crisis? This Paul Gauguin painting is entitled, Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? Before we look at some integral stories about what all this might be, let's look at what all this is not. In Western culture, until about 100 years ago, the philosophical idealist traditional worldview, which held that the fundamental of all existence was a personal God, the creator of the universe, was dominant. This God was often depicted in religious iconography as an older man with a beard. This artistic symbol is taken literally by many people at the traditional stage of growth. Newtonian physics, the dominant science of the last 300 years, requires that physical bodies be treated as point particles for its mathematics to work. This assumption is in keeping with philosophical materialism, which dates back to the views of the ancient Greek philosophers Lysippus and Democritus, who believed that tiny indivisible particles of matter were the fundamental substance in nature. Philosophical materialism is based on these ideas and is the metaphysical basis of Western culture's modern and postmodern worldviews. In the early 20th century, philosopher Bertrand Russell realized that physics doesn't really describe what a particle is. All it does is describe the behavior or properties of something of an unknown nature that it calls a particle. Tiny indivisible particles of matter are not the fundamental substance of the universe. This realization, along with quantum physics, destroyed the metaphysical basis of philosophical materialism, the foundation of the modern and postmodern worldviews. Quantum physics and relativity replaced Newtonian mechanics. The best quantum physics descriptions of the fundamental nature of the universe requires a mathematics that treats particles as excitations of quantum fields. Those maths gives the best maps of nature we have come up with so far. That does not mean we know what the particles, which are the fundamental thing in the universe, really are. They are not tiny lumps of matter or even excitations of quantum fields. Those are metaphors for something unknown. As the 14th century anonymous Christian mystic wrote in the classic, The Cloud of Unknowing, we cannot think our way to God. He can be loved, but not thought. The fundamental nature of the universe remains today, as it was that mystic, ineffable. So, what in heaven is all this? Our inconceivably vast universe consists of all the potentially observable space-time with its planets, stars, galaxies, and all other forms of visible and invisible dark matter and energy. Our universe contains not only matter, but also mind and consciousness. The best scientific evidence suggests that the universe of space-time, energy, and matter began in the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. Since space-time began with the Big Bang, was even there anything before the Big Bang? There are many stories about the creation of the universe, including 1. A designing intelligence, often called God, that transcends the universe, made it, and either does or does not continue to act upon it. 2. A material universe arose spontaneously from nothing, without a designing intelligence, and has evolved because of natural laws and randomness. 3. Our universe is a child of another universe. 4. Our universe is a zoo for beings from another dimension to visit. 5. The right answer is almost certainly that we don't know the right questions, much less the right answers. Keeping that in mind, my favorite answer, which we'll explore further today, is the universe arose from universal mind and is what that mind looks like from across a dissociative barrier. Don't worry, we'll explain what this means later. This answer is, I'm completely certain, wrong, but to me, the most pleasing answer I've come across so far. Searching for an answer to what in heaven is this, I haven't found a more convincing one that I also understand. Many of us ordinary human beings think we know what this is. The extraordinary human beings among us know that this is ineffable or impossible to describe. Let's look at some quotations. From Einstein, I see a pattern, but my imagination cannot picture the maker of that pattern. I see a clock, but I cannot envision the clockmaker. The human mind is unable to conceive of the four dimensions. So how can it conceive of a God before whom 1,000 years and 1,000 dimensions are as one? And for Max Planck, all matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. And from Werner Heisenberg. The first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist. But at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. From the Tao Te Ching, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that could be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. From St. Augustine, if you understand God, it's not God you have understood. And from Richard Feynman, if you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics. How do vague stories and mystical quotations offer us a way out of our crisis? Each of the integral stages of growth's worldviews is an adaptation to a society's conditions and circumstances at a particular point in social evolution. As societies become larger and more complex, the old worldviews are no longer adaptive, and societies develop new worldviews that are more adaptive to the new circumstances. Each of the integral stages worldviews take into account what their society's challenges are and how they can be approached and dealt with. In Western society, there are several subcultures, each at a different integral stage of growth, and each cognitively and emotionally invested in a different worldview, with different ideas of what the problems are and solutions. These subcultures, like internal family parts, conflict with each other. In Western society, people at one stage of growth blame those at different stages for causing the problems their stage is trying to solve. Historically, in societies where such internal social family conflicts occur, more and more of the society's energy and resources are consumed by the conflict, and that society collapses. Subcultures that think, feel, and act at an archaic, tribal, warrior, traditional, modern, or postmodern first tier, emotional part self, rather than wise mind, stage of development are maladaptive in a global society such as ours, in which technology can destroy us and we all either thrive or perish together. The dominant traditional, modern, and postmodern stories, while valid at one point in our cultural evolution, are no longer adaptive in today's world. The integral stage of development is very similar to wise mind. It understands all other stages as part selves and recognizes they bring something valuable to the whole. The integral stage empathizes with the other stages and understands their origin stories. It does not, however, accept their claim that they are better than other stages or their desire to dominate and fight one another. It seeks a healthy integration of all of them. Society's part selves. Internal family systems understands people in terms of their internal part selves, exiles, managers, and firefighters. Personal wise mind understands and integrates those parts as people heal. Societies can also be thought of as being made up of parts, which are the various subcultures, each at a different integral stage of development. Some of these parts are exiles who carry the pain of society. They are the people who are disenfranchised, the poor, homeless, people with addictions and mental health issues, Native people, racialized people, LGBTQ+, refugees, working class white people, economically left behind by neoliberalism, etc. The external critic subculture parts blame other subcultures in society for all its ills. The internal critic subculture parts blame themselves and accept that their problems are all their fault and don't see how the role of the system plays in their issues. They are often in freeze and despair. The indulger subculture parts distract themselves from the pain by seeking pleasure and engaging in consumerism, amusements, and material pursuits. There are also people pleasers, compulsive caretakers, wild children, rebels, etc. subculture parts. People who are socially dominated by one of these parts often identify and join with like-minded others, forming subcultures that are in conflict with other subcultures. Only from transpersonal wise mind can we understand that we're all one and will all either thrive or perish together. We need to take ownership of our future. Transpersonal repair and healing. To review, what has made us so successful as a species are the meaningful stories that bind us together and help us cooperate. Without uniting, meaningful, shared worldviews, we fill the void with simplistic, poorly thought out, emotional, paranoid, conspiratorial, and divisive stories driven by the seeking and fight flight instincts. Transpersonal wise mind understands how the different cultural parts, stages, or stories originated in their feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, but it is also aware that these parts in isolation are about the past and not adaptive in today's world. Our societal rational mind knows there is a crisis, but our cultural, angry, external critic part self blames the crisis on other societal part selves. Our global system needs to be led by transpersonal wise mind rather than by the subcultural emotional parts. Integral stories are the stories of transpersonal wise mind. A quotation from Erwin Schrödinger: multiplicity is only apparent. In truth, there is only one mind. Repairing the meaning crisis. Developing a healthy, integral wise mind global culture requires better stories than the ones that currently dominate our culture. Some features these stories must incorporate include: 1. Have critical, rational, and wise mind thinking. 2. Stay humble in the face of the complexity of the territory. 3. Stay in the window of tolerance when dialoguing. 4. Be understanding instead of judging. 5. Have respect for other stories. And 6. Have a fierce commitment to truth, not to wanting to be right or to power, fame, or fortune. These are features of a transpersonal wise mind worldview which loves the stories of all its subcultures, understands them, where they come from, and sees their strengths, but also their limitations. To repair our cultural meaning crisis, we must start with our own individual healing and growth. Before we can have a better our story, we must have a good my story. It's also important that we're guided or inspired by a better the story, something that we're currently missing. We need a transpersonal wise mind the story that incorporates the best of all the subcultures while also reconciling science and spirituality and bringing meaning and purpose back into our lives and our culture. When we talked about internal family systems, we explored some of the characteristics of personal wise mind. Transpersonal wise mind must also have certain characteristics. Features that a transpersonal wise mind story must have to address our current societal crisis. 1. Not be a nihilistic story like materialism and restore meaning. 2. Acknowledge the imagination, soul, spirit, and unconscious as real. 3. Acknowledge trauma and foster individual, collective, and planetary healing. 4. Re-enchant the world with mystery, awe, wonder, and epistemological humility. 5. Promote the brain's right hemispheric connection, oriented holistic perspective. 6. Enlarge our circle of moral concern. Better this story. Integral theory stages are stories or maps. They tell us where we are, where we want to go, why we want to go there, and how to get there. The different worldviews, stages, hold that this journey we call life, 1. Has no meaning, 2. Has subjective meaning, 3. Has objective meaning, and 4. Has supernormal or supernatural meaning. Philosophical materialism, which is the metaphysics of modern and postmodern stages, leads to the views that life either has no meaning or has only whatever meaning we give it. We are not part of anything bigger. The traditional and integral worldviews hold that life has objective, supernormal, or supernatural meaning. There are two worlds, and meaning arises only when, while living in this world, we take the sacred other world to be real. This makes life worth living since nothing is more meaningful than being part of something bigger, sacred, or otherworldly. An integral worldview integrates the best of the great spiritual traditions with the most up to date scientific knowledge. It sounds like we're not in Kansas anymore. Is it even possible to find a way out of our holes or cultural crisis within a materialist metaphysics? I don't think so. I think that to find a way out of this crisis, we need to go back to an idealist metaphysics. Before discussing this in any more depth, let's just quickly review why metaphysics is critical to developing a transpersonal wise mind integral stage worldview. Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that contemplates the fundamental nature of reality. It asks, among many other questions, what is the universe made of? Science studies and describes how nature behaves. Metaphysics asks, what is it that is behaving? There are three basic answers to this question: materialism, idealism, and dualism. Materialism says that matter is the building blocks of everything in the universe. Consciousness and mind are epiphenomena or byproducts of matter. Idealism holds that the universe is fundamentally consciousness or mind. Dualism proposes that both mind and matter are basic essences. Traditional religion-based worldviews are idealistic or dualistic. Modern and postmodern secular worldviews are materialistic. Integral worldviews are idealistic or dualistic. Our metaphysics matters because it is from these metaphysical building blocks that our worldviews are built. The results are our ethics, politics, economy, psychology, etc. Differences in metaphysical views are why Eastern versus Western and atheist versus religious worldviews are so different. Idealist metaphysics has some negative associations with New Age fluffy theories, but idealism isn't new at all, is it? No, in fact, it's quite ancient. As you might recall, when at the beginning of the symbol course, we traced it from ancient Hinduism to the Judeo-Christian traditions. Much of what we recognize as wise is grounded in idealist, not materialist metaphysics. Let's start with some integral quotations. From Nisargadatta Maharaj. Wisdom tells me I am nothing. Love tells me I am everything. And between the two, my life flows. The sense of mystery, wonder, awe, humility, and that we're nothing and yet everything has been a driving force behind spirituality, philosophy, and science. This sense intuits a wholeness of which we are a part, but which we cannot fully understand, only be in awe of. From Socrates. I know one thing, and that is that I know nothing. What we perceive and know is filtered through our biased reducing lenses and limited by our cognition and intellect. We are in the same position as the chickens of my childhood, living beside humans without any comprehension of our world. Einstein might have been a smarter chicken, but he was still a chicken. Like the chickens of my childhood, we can't even imagine what the world is like to a species with different cognitive and sensory apparatus from us, much less one much more intelligent than us. Like our human world is unimaginable to the chickens, there may be beings coexisting in the universe with us that we might not even be able to perceive, that are vastly more intelligent than we are, whose world we can't even imagine. From William Blake. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to a man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up, till he sees all things through the narrow chinks of his cavern. The best we can do is come up with better, more wise maps, however limited they may be, by the narrow chinks of our cavern. And finally, a quote from Barry Taylor, AC/DC's road manager. God is the name of the blanket we throw over mystery to give it shape. People have a great desire to peer behind the veil, to try to catch glimpses of integral stories. Catching these glimpses can transform their lives. Some of those who have tried to peek behind the veil include Edgar Mitchell. Dr. Edgar Mitchell was the sixth man to walk on the moon. As he voyaged back aboard Apollo 14, he had a mystical experience in which he felt enveloped by a profound sense of universal connectedness. Quote, I realized that the story of ourselves as told by science, our cosmology, our religion, was incomplete and likely flawed. I recognized that the Newtonian ideas of separate, independent, discrete things in the universe wasn't a fully accurate description. What was needed was a new story of who we are and what we're capable of becoming. There have been approximately 600 humans that have been to space, many of whom have experienced the overview effect, which is a transcendent experience of connection with humanity as a whole evoked by seeing the Earth from space as a tiny, fragile ball of life, hanging in the void, shielded by a paper-thin atmosphere. Mitchell founded the Institute for Noetic Sciences, whose mission is to reveal the interconnected nature of reality through scientific exploration and personal discovery. Integral glimpses from William James and George Lemaitre, a priest and physicist who first proposed the Big Bang. William James was an American philosopher, historian, and the father of American psychology. He was the president of the British Society for Psychical Research. He challenged his colleagues not to let a narrow mindset prevent an honest appraisal of paranormal phenomena. He studied the paranormal. In his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, James describes the range of spiritual experiences, including mysticism. A quotation from George Lemaitre. Should a priest reject relativity because it contains no authoritative exposition on the doctrine of the Trinity? Once you realize that the Bible does not purport to be a textbook of science, the old controversy between religion and science vanishes. The doctrine of the Trinity is much more abstruse than anything in relativity or quantum mechanics, but being necessary for salvation, doctrine is stated in the Bible. If the theory of relativity had also been necessary for salvation, it would have been revealed to St. Paul or to Moses. And Ian Stevenson. Ian Stevenson was a Canadian-born American psychiatrist. He was the founder of the University of Virginia's Division for Perceptual Studies, which investigates paranormal phenomena. Over a period of 40 years, he collected 3,000 cases of children who claimed to remember past lives. Most scientists have ignored his work. Integral glimpses have been described and documented in many publications, such as these. Can you describe in more detail one such integral thus story? At this point, my favorite this story is Bernardo Kastrup's. Let's look at who he is and his ideas. Bernardo Kastrup holds a PhD in computer engineering as well as a PhD in philosophy. He is both philosophically rigorous and deeply knowledgeable in modern physics. He's also open, humble, curious, funny, and one of the most intelligent people that I am able to understand. He worked as a CERN, European Organization for Nuclear Research, scientist. He founded and sold a successful technology startup. He writes for Scientific American. He is a skeptic communicator and science educator. He's the author of numerous books, including Why Materialism is Baloney. He's a popular guest on many podcasts. He's the director of the nonprofit Essentia Foundation, dedicating to informing the public about idealism and promoting new ways of looking at ourselves and the world. The Foundation's website offers videos, articles, and courses, including a course in analytical idealism, a refutation of philosophical materialism, and defense of idealism. I highly recommend it. Kastrup puts forward the view that idealism is the most logical philosophical position, and in contrast to materialism, is compatible with modern physics. I will try to convey his arguments in 6 slides. Kastrup's key ideas. 1. The Standard Model theory of particle physics describes 3 of the 4 known fundamental forces and classifies all known elementary particles that we commonly refer to as matter. It is self-consistent and has demonstrated huge successes in providing experimental predictions. In our current understanding, the elementary particles of the Standard Model are excitations of quantum fields that also govern their interactions. Quantum field theory treats particles as excited states of their underlying quantum fields, which are more fundamental than the particles. What is a field? At the human scale, air is the field or medium that carries sound waves. Music and sound is an excitation state of the air field. The people in a sports stadium are the field that carries the cheering arm wave. Modern physics does not support the view that nature consists of tiny particles of matter. Most scientists don't bother thinking too much about this. They just shut up and calculate. Those who think philosophically about these issues, such as Bernardo Kastrup, conclude that the universe looks more like a thought, mind, or consciousness than a big machine made up of material parts. Kastrup's key ideas, too. We see the world not as it is, but as we are. Their senses and perceptions are like an airplane's instruments. They are simplified representations of the world, not what the world is actually like. Pilots can fly an airplane completely by instruments, for example, in a dense fog. What we perceive of the world is not what the world is like, but what our instruments, our senses, and our cognition reuse as the world too. These instruments evolved through natural Darwinian selection to favor survival. Kastrup's key ideas. 3. Consciousness refers to any kind of experience, perception, feeling, cognition, or self-awareness. A few different types of consciousness have been described. Among them, A, phenomenal consciousness, is the experience of what it feels like to be something. For example, it feels like something to be a worm. Phenomenal consciousness is the kind of consciousness we experience in deep, dreamless sleep. B, emotional consciousness exists in organisms that are driven entirely by instincts or feelings without any cognition or self-awareness. These organisms react to what it feels like to be something following hardwired programs. They experience the environment and the programs, but no thought or self-awareness. This is emotional mind. C, cognitive consciousness. Not only feels like something and reacts, but also thinks and reflects about one's relation to the world. This is rational mind. D, self-aware consciousness is knowing that one is conscious. Humans experience this type of consciousness when they are aware of their sensations, feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. This is wise mind. D, dream consciousness. The state of consciousness we experience while dreaming. This is thought in the Eastern traditions and those in the Jung lineage to provide access to the soul or an otherworldly realm that is beyond the mundane world of the self. E, altered states of consciousness. These are the types of consciousness we experience when having a mystical experience or are in a state of psychosis. They are similar to dream consciousness in that we perceive a realm that is beyond that of the self. F, universal consciousness. In the Eastern traditions is the ground of being or the sky upon which all other types of consciousness exist. It is the quantum field upon which all the excitation states of the universe occur, contains all the other forms of consciousness. Kastrup's key ideas. 4. Life is a dissociation of an individual consciousness from universal consciousness. Individual consciousness is like an eddy in a body of water that is universal consciousness. It is both separate from and exists within the larger body of water. This dissociation from universal consciousness is much like that which happens in dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder. Dissociation is a fundamental property of the universe. The physical universe, including our bodies and brains, is what universal mind looks like to a dissociated individual human alter, consciousness, or eddy. The water around our individual eddy is the collective mind or soul that has evolved from the ground of all being or universal consciousness and contains all the unfolding excitation states of the quantum field. Paranormal experiences are compatible with this view because the boundary between the eddy and the body of water, or between our consciousness and the collective mind, is permeable and fluid. In mystical and spiritual experiences, we see beyond our individual eddy. Birth and death are transitions between personal consciousness and collective soul consciousness. To repeat, this is my favorite but undoubtedly wrong answer to what this is. It's a map that I'm certain is not the territory. It is the most pleasing map I've come across so far. I have not yet come across a better map that I'm able to understand. The current materialist one clearly isn't. This story helped me find meaning and purpose. Castrup's key ideas. 5. What is this? Physics tells us that nature is not made up of particles, but of quantum fields and their excitation states. At the Big Bang was the primordial quantum field, which had the potentiality to evolve into ever more complex states of excitation. When one thing, such as a cell, divides into two things, in a cell through mitosis, a boundary is created between those two things that were once one. In dissociative identity disorder or multiple personalities, the cell fragments into distinct alters. All alters are distinct entities, yet at the same time, from a wise mind perspective, they are parts of the same self. Between these alters, there is not a real boundary, but a dissociative boundary. Alters can reintegrate. 6. Castrup's toe, or theory of everything. When life began in the universe, a dissociative boundary was created within the evolving quantum field, with its ever more complex excitations. The life alters were at first quite simple. They were somatic and had phenomenal consciousness, meaning it felt like something to be them. That feeling was, however, still a part of the excitation of the universal quantum field. As the life alters evolved, their complexity developed from phenomenal to emotional, cognitive, and eventually to self-aware consciousness, which is the type of consciousness humans experience. We, human alters, feel that our consciousness is individual, which it is during our lifetime. After death, when our individual eddy ceases to exist, that individual self-aware consciousness, now without a dissociative boundary, rejoins the evolving universal consciousness. The excitation of the eddy becomes one with the excitation of the universal mind. The material universe studied by science is what universal consciousness looks like to an alter. It is the quantum field with its evolving, ever more complex excitations, including the evolving forms of consciousness. Matter is what the evolving quantum field, or God, self, the observer, looks like to a dissociated alter. Our eddy's internal experiences or consciousness is an infinitesimal fraction of what the evolving quantum field looks like from the inside. Mind and matter are two aspects of the same thing. A musical metaphor might help us to understand what Castrup is proposing. Quotation from Michio Kaku, an American theoretical physicist and author of numerous books. Music is the voice of God traveling through 10-dimensional hyperspace. Music is an unfolding excitation state of the air field. It is created by a composer and played by a musician. Hydrogen and helium, after the Big Bang, were simple excitation states or single notes the universe was playing in the quantum field. Today, the universe is an incredibly complex symphony. Self-aware consciousness has made humans the audience listening to the symphony, while at the same time, we are also the symphony being played. The symphony, like all good music, is at times uplifting, at others heartbreaking. In session 26, we talked about spirituality, and you mentioned one of your favorite academics, Jeffrey Kripal. Do Kripal's ideas fit in with Castrup's? Jeffrey Kripal's and Bernardo Castrup's ideas Following Kastrup's water eddy metaphor, at death, the eddy disappears and the individual mind rejoins the evolving collective universal mind and contributes to it. The evolving collective universal mind contains the inner experience of all that has existed, the laws of physics, chemistry, life, archetypes, and memories of living beings. All those excitations are part of that great symphony. The boundaries between any eddy and the body of water are porous, not impermeable. Supernatural phenomena, as Jeffrey Kripal suggests, may be phenomena that involve crossings of this boundary between the eddy and the water surrounding it, and that have features of the physical world and features of the world of the soul or imagination. They are in between phenomena, having properties from each of the different worlds they straddle. Some individuals experience phenomena that cross this boundary more readily than others. The permeability of an eddy's boundary is also increased in altered states of consciousness and mystical experiences. This narrative, although not literally true, since we can't apprehend ultimate reality, is a better map of what this is than the materialist story. In this narrative, we are one with something greater, and life, to quote Carl Jung, truly is a luminous pause between two mysteries that are yet one. Is there any connection between these ideas and the psychodynamic theory that we explored, and which took us on a journey that included ideas such as structural dissociation theory and internal family systems? Idealism and internal family systems. The idea that a person can be influenced, possessed, or inhabited by extraneous entities is ancient and common across many cultures. Possession, controlled by benevolent or malevolent spirits, past lives, reincarnation, muses, gifted and impossibly precocious individuals, etc. These phenomena have been extensively studied using scientific methodology that strongly suggests that, despite their rejection by mainstream materialist science, they are real. Philosophical materialism and mainstream science reject these ideas as unscientific because they assume that the brain creates the mind and all phenomena associated with it. Idealism, as articulated by Kastrup, allows for the reality of these concepts. Entities or archetypes may exist in the collective universal mind. From birth, each individual's eddy incorporates and is subsequently influenced by some of these archetypes, particularly those common in their ancestors, parents, and those who influenced them. Carl Jung describes this in his concept of the collective unconscious. Part selves may be a person's dominant archetypes. The biologist Rupert Sheldrake's concept of morphic resonance also aligns with these ideas. Wise mind is the perspective that sees and understands that it is archetypes that influence us. Without wise mind, the person remains under the influence of these part selves, archetypes, and has little free will. Wise mind gives us some possibility of free will. If you think these are new ideas, consider, for instance, the spiritual tradition of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who lived from 1491 to 1556 and founded the Jesuit order. Ignatius of Loyola anticipated much of what we talked about in this course in his ideas about discernment and the examen. The Ignatian examen. Discernment is a phrase that is often used in Jesuit Ignatian circles. Some refer to discernment as making decisions in the presence of God, while others refer to a more structured approach that arises from the rules set down in the spiritual exercises of Ignatius. This process of decision-making is intimately tied to the process of discernment of spirits. Discernment of spirits is the interpretation of what St. Ignatius of Loyola called the motions of the soul. These interior movements consist of thoughts, imaginings, emotionings, inclinations, desires, feelings, repulsions, and attractions. Spiritual discernment of spirits involves becoming sensitive to these movements, reflecting on them, and understanding where they come from and where they lead us. The practice of discernment of spirits may take place outside of the context of decision-making. In fact, the practice of discernment takes place in the daily examen. The daily examen is a reflective prayer that consists of a review of the day where one tries to discover where God has been a part and how we have responded. By our reflection, we hope to discern whether our desires and choices are motivated by the Holy Spirit or a base or evil spirit. Coming to understand our motivations helps us choose what is good rather than destructive, holy rather than evil. All this sounds very intriguing, but how can it help us to remedy the crisis that we're in? If a cell in a human body only looks after its interests and begins to consume energy and reproduce without concern for the cells around it, it becomes cancerous and eventually destroys the whole organism. Although we are individuals, we're also part of the whole and have to contribute and live in harmony with it. To quote Erwin Schrödinger and Bertrand Russell. Schrödinger. For a solitary animal, egoism is a virtue that tends to preserve and improve the species. In any kind of community, it becomes a destructive vice. Russell. If we are to live together and not die together, we must learn a kind of charity and a kind of tolerance, which is absolutely vital to the continuation of the human life on this planet. Integral perspectives are already changing the world. Therapy seeks to help people to have an overview of the patterns in their lives. This is Wise Mind. Integral theory helps us to have an overview of the collective humanity on planet Earth. Viewing ourselves from Wise Mind helps us to understand, reconcile, and integrate our internal part selves. As we transcend the self and identify with the capital S self, we recognize we are all part of a whole. This will help understand, reconcile, and integrate the different subcultures that are a dysfunctional global family. Far from being a utopian dream, this integration is well underway. The United Nations, World Court, Red Cross, European Union, Doctors Without Borders, Habitat for Humanity, and innumerable other nonprofit NGOs are making this integral view a reality. Bertrand Russell pointed out other steps that would help make the world an integral community. One, a federal world government that controls the military, thereby putting an end to wars, but within which there is regional autonomy. Two, reasonable economic equality among people and regions. Three, a stable world population. If this seems overwhelming, consider act locally, think globally. If you can't imagine it, it will never happen. There are many realistically achievable integral goals. No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industrial innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace and justice, strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. To end the course, is it possible to bring all this back full circle to our physical and mental health? Why not? Let's end with some definitions. Medicine comes from the Old French for the art of healing and deals with the body. Psychiatry comes from the Greek for healing the soul. Biological psychiatry, rooted in the materialist tradition, says there's no soul. The mind is the brain and to be treated in the same way as other organs. Integral psychiatry holds a bio-psycho-social spiritual perspective where each of these elements are equally real and need to be considered in healing. Some illnesses can be well treated by focusing primarily on the body and ignoring the other elements, surgical emergencies like appendicitis, infections, broken bones. In contrast, many psychiatric issues, including trauma and attachment, are mainly psychosocial spiritual and only secondarily biological. Psychosomatic medicine is an interdisciplinary field that explores the relationship between the biological, social, psychological, and spiritual factors in illness. There is a stigma associated with psychosomatic illnesses. Often, they are not considered to be real or legitimate. This is compounded by their historical association with hysteria and the complexities of its treatment. The symptoms associated with these illnesses often involve the poorly understood immune and autonomic nervous systems, which are systems that involve the interaction of the inside with the outside of the organism. Research, including the adverse childhood event studies, points to a significant connection between stress, trauma, attachment, and psychosomatic illnesses. There is a true epidemic of psychosomatic illnesses, which include, among many others, autoimmune diseases, myalgic encephalomyelitis, dysautonomia, electromagnetic sensitivity, mold and mycotoxin associated illnesses, and multiple chemical sensitivities. One common denominator that keeps emerging in illnesses, and especially psychosomatic illnesses, is stress and inflammation. Stressors can affect primarily the body and can be visible or invisible. Viruses, bacteria, environmental toxins, injuries, physical trauma, poor nutrition. Stressors can affect primarily the mind. Conflicts with others, negative self-image, types of abuse, insecure attachment. Stress, regardless of whether it first primarily affects the body or the mind, inevitably affects both because they have a common pathway: inflammation and fight-flight. Inflammation is the body's process of fighting against things that harm it. Psychological stress also causes inflammation. Depression and anxiety are inflammatory states. The immune system and the autonomic nervous systems are really one system, the body's defense against stress system. They are intimately linked, and illnesses in one often involve illnesses in the other. Integral medicine. Integral psychiatry seeks to understand humans from the psychological, social, spiritual, and physical perspectives. Modern physical medicine focuses, understands, and treats primarily the realm of the body. Psychosomatic medicine is the marriage of modern medicine and integral psychiatry. Psychosomatic illnesses may involve both the body and soul. Like Jeffrey Kripal's supernatural phenomenon, psychosomatic illnesses have features of the physical or the most personal aspects of the edi, as well as the mental, with its transpersonal aspects of the edi. They cannot be treated if all that's considered is the body. The mental aspects of the edi are like Jung's archipelago, with the personal conscious being the most personal aspect of the edi, and the collective unconscious being a transpersonal aspect or part of the greater body of water and consciousness. To understand illness, we have to understand more than just the body. We also have to understand society, spirituality, and the conscious and unconscious mind. In the PowerPoint presentation that you will find on the website, there's a review and practice component that covers the tools, techniques, and strategies that we have previously covered in the simple course. Looking over those slides will help you consolidate the material. Now let's look at the homework for this session. This is the last of our YouTube videos. Thank you for being with me for these last 29 sessions. I hope you found this material useful.